Because I think one thing founders really don't understand is like investors are looking for small incremental wins over time. They don't want to see what you did over 12 months. They want to see in 3 months, we went from here to here.
Welcome to another episode of Forging the Future. And today I'm speaking with Billy Grandy, who's the director of Softeq Venture Studio. Thanks for being here, Billy.
Thanks, Chris, for inviting me.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. You know, what your first startup was 20 years ago. How did you get here?
Yeah. So
when did you take the red pill, Billy?
Yeah, I did. So I feel like I've always been an entrepreneur. Ever since I was young, I've worked since I was 13 years old. And
what was your first job?
My first job was working for a family friend of my parents in Florida, and they owned a business where it was a seasonal business. So they would sell fireworks and pottery and pumpkins and Christmas trees. So I would work in each of those holiday seasons at a tree lot. I was like a carny, right? And that's how I started working.
Wow. Was it hard?
It was very hard work and very long hours. So, when I was in high school doing it, before I went to the surf shop, I would work till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and then go to school. And when I would leave school and go work all night long again. So it was crazy, but I think that was ingrained in me as a child because I saw my parents do it. So my grandfather started an optical business in the 50s. And I think my dad saw his dad working like crazy. And I saw that same thing. So I think it was just one of those things you learned growing up, right? So that's how I started.
The work ethic?
The work ethic of not being afraid to take on a challenge and working really hard and learning that you're always going to have something. You're always going to be at some form of disadvantage. You might not be the most educated. You might not know the most. But if you just work hard enough, you're always going to outwork someone. That was always my rationale, right? And it worked, right? So I would say my first real entrepreneurial experience was when I was in high school. I worked for a surf shop in Lantana, Florida called Tommy's. And the owner lived in Colorado. And he had a water ski wakeboard shop in Denver, Colorado. And then he had the surf shop in Florida. And I was an assistant manager. He was gone about half the year. And we had other managers. Well, I became a manager at a really young age.
Like how old?
17.
Wow.
Right? So I was managing the business my senior year of high school, basically. I was basically forced into it, right? So, because there was no one else to do the job. So it was like, he had to make a decision as the owner living across both sides, like what to do. So I kind of went straight from high school, straight to working full time and having all the responsibilities of someone, managing payroll and managing all the things that come along with a business, which of course I knew nothing about, right? I just learned it. And that's where I started. And then I got married really young. So,
as did I.
Yep. So my wife and I started dating when we were 16. By the time we were 19, we were making pretty good money, and we had had the decision to get married. The owner of the surf shop wanted to sell it. He was selling both the businesses. And I didn't really want to go into millions of dollars in debt at the age of 19, right?
For some reason. I
didn't know if that's what I wanted to do, right? So I ended up getting a phone call from someone that I had worked with before that had started an e-commerce kiteboarding company. And that was my first real startup, I would say, was the e-commerce kiteboarding. So somebody
called you and had a kite company.
Yeah.
And somehow, how did it turn out to be you got involved in that? They called the surf shop, they got a kite company, and...
Like anything, I'm a believer in collisions and pouring into people's lives and meeting people, right? So it ended up, the way that happened was there was a guy that was a manager of the surf shop when I first started named Jeff Beige was his name. Jeff taught this guy named Alex Sjogren how to kiteboard. And Alex wanted to start the company. So Jeff was one of the co-founders of the kiteboarding company. And Jeff knew another guy named Jeff that knew me. We all knew each other through the surf shop, right? And the rationale for me working at the surf shop is that I understood how to do sales. That was the only rationale, right? So they were doing direct-to-consumer e-commerce, but they realized before they had even launched that they were going to have a B2B side of the business. Like most direct-to-consumer businesses realize at some point, they realized it really early on. So I was brought on to help manage the e-commerce side, but also run sales for the B2B side of the business. So that was my first startup. I knew so little, I didn't even know what equity was, right? I had no equity in the company. They're like, do you want equity or cash? I'm like, I'll take cash, right?
Right.
So, but that was my true first startup, and we started it from nothing.
And how big did it get?
So we got to a decent amount in revenue, 20, 30 million in revenue fairly quickly.
Impressive.
I think the bigger thing was what we did in the industry was very transformative, right? So this was 20 years ago. We were selling $1,000 things online 20 years ago, which just wasn't done. There was no Facebook ads. There was no Google ads. You had to do everything in blogs and create forums. And really, I think what I learned is how to create like a grassroots marketing. That's how we built the company, right? And we did it by taking an old school industry and flipping it upside down. So we made it cheaper for people to get in. We made it safer. We did all those things you would expect. But at the core of it was we flipped the business model upside down. So
it was a huge amount of learning how to run a business. And once you got a taste of that, how did you go from the kiteboarding company to all the accelerators and all the other startups you did in your career?
Yeah. So I think it kind of bobbed and weaved through a very crazy, just a crazy amount of luck, quite honestly, right? And a lot of it was people I had met over the years and stayed in friendships and relationships with them, and they would know someone that needed help doing some part of it, right? In the early days, my career into the startup world definitely started in sales, and that's the background of where it all came from. So after the kiteboarding company, I went and worked for one corporation, and I lasted about 18 months. And I realized that's not for me, right?
What was it, by the way?
It was Goodman, actually, a Houston company. One of those weird circles of how I got to Houston long before I ever came here.
The air conditioning company?
Yeah.
Really?
Yep. So
it's also one of our customers.
Yeah. So I went and did that for like 18 months and just realized I'm not a corporate person, right? And then I went back into the entrepreneurial world and went to different startups, predominantly in the hardware space. That's for whatever reason, I'm a glutton for punishment, and a lot of them were hardware based.
Right.
So it's hard to remember the first one, actually. I can't even think of it right now, but there's too many of them. But, with a lot of those companies, I ended up at accelerators, right? A lot of those companies I was an early employee of.
And you've gone through Techstars, you've gone through Disney Accelerator,
Yep.
You've gone through...
We've gone through Hacks, which is an SOSV. We've gone through a few government ones. Went through the Sprint Accelerator. So I've been through my fair share of accelerators. I'm a big believer in them. I think just like, getting an MBA from Rice or Harvard or a prestigious university, that's what the good accelerators are, right? It's the MBA of startup school, right? Now, there's a lot of bad actors. There's a lot of people that don't know what they're doing, that are doing them, that think they're adding value. But the good ones are the ones that where the real value is added, right?
And you mentioned collisions, and I'm also a big fan of collisions. So how did you end up in Houston, and how did you end up at the Venture Studio?
Yeah. So they're kind of tied together. So, years and years, about 12 years ago, I was at a company that had gone through Techstars Boulder, and that's where I met Joel Carter, who's the CMO of Softeq, right? Back then he wasn't.
Right.
Joel and I stayed friends. The company that actually had gone through that Boulder accelerator, we ended up going through the Disney accelerator with them. And that company, we exited that company. The company got acquired. After that company was acquired, I had gone back to Florida. So I'm from Florida originally. And I had lived in LA at the time. So I had moved to LA, and the company got acquired. So I had moved back to Florida. And at this point in my life, I had 2 young kids. I go back to Florida, and that's where all my families are from. My wife's family's all from there. My family's all from there. And then just through my network, got an offer to move to Houston for a startup. So moved here about 6 years ago for that startup, and was there about almost 2 years, and decided to part ways and kind of go do our own things. And that's when I decided I was kind of at a crossroads. I could have gone back to Florida. We could have gone and lived somewhere else in the world, but we specifically chose to stay in Houston. And there's some reasons for that, both personal and professional.
And what are those?
So on the personal side, it's because Houston's a great place to live and raise a family. So I'm from Southeast Florida. Southeast Florida is a great place to visit, and it's a great place to go on vacation. It's not the easiest place to raise your family, right? Houston's an easy place to raise a family. So that was the personal side. And on the professional side, I had spent a lot of my career in what I would call like innovation hubs or startup hubs. So that would be from, the West Coast of the US to Dubai to parts of China and Asia. And I saw a lot of the makings of what had already happened there being in Houston, which is a combination of a lot of things, right? It's having a lot of talent and diversity. I think that's a big driver of innovation, right? I think that it's pretty well known if you look at the statistics of founders that have founded some of the largest companies in the tech space that have gone on to either IPO or be acquired, that most of them are founded by diverse groups of people that don't all see the world the same and don't all look the same.
Right.
And I was shocked when I moved here to find out that Houston was the most culturally diverse city in America. I would have never thought that.
Right.
Right.
We're all hicks on cowboys down here.
That's right.
On horses. Cowboys on horses.
Yeah, it's funny when like our family would come here the first couple of times, we're like, where are all the cowboys? The cowboys, right? It's like, that's not how it works.
Right.
So it had that. And I think the other thing I saw was on the financial side was just inherently how much risk the entrepreneurs in Houston take when they go and, dig $100 million hole in the ground or build $1 billion oil platform.
The wildcatters.
That may or may not work, right? And I think that's ingrained in like the DNA of a lot of the successful folks in Houston, right? So what I saw was a misdirection, though, of what they thought a tech startup or a startup really was, right? And there were clearly some things missing, right?
Like hubs.
Like hubs and people willing to just have a mentality of give first. I think the biggest things I learned from Techstars, one of them was this give first mentality, right? And it's just sometimes you have to give a lot into a situation or a person or an entrepreneur or whatever to ultimately have that to receive it back, and you will at some point receive it back, right?
And sincerely do that, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
And do it without a expectation of anything, right? That didn't exist, right? I think it existed on a personal level in Houston. I think generally speaking, people in Houston and people really in the South are much more friendly. They'll help you change your tire. They'll help you if you're open a door or whatever, right? They'll help you out. That didn't exist in the business world that I had been involved in, right?
Yeah, I agree. And we've talked a lot about this, that not everything has to be transactional, and you really need to give first and give sincerely. And there are great examples of that. And I think that actually contributed to how you and I met, right?
For sure. Yeah, I think we had a lot of conversations about how to like use our skill sets together to do better, right? And
how to benefit Houston, how to get this startup ecosystem going. And then eventually led to what we're doing in the Venture Studio as well, right?
For sure. Yeah, I think it's just an evolution, right? It's an evolution of, 10, 15 years ago, there were groups of people that had come from, software backgrounds, or they had been entrepreneurs and exited. And those a lot of those folks were the early founders of what are the great accelerators today, right? I think we're just doing it in a way that matches the modern times from the technology needs. And if you wouldn't have built Softeq for 25 years and poured into that, it wouldn't be possible. And I think that's what makes us unique, right? I think a lot of other folks could go build what we're building in the Softeq Venture Studio, but what they couldn't do is do it overnight, right? You can't just build a software development company overnight and do it and have the depth of knowledge that Softeq has, right?
Right. So you met Joel, and then how did that connect you here?
Yeah, so Joel and I are spirit animals. So those people you meet in life where you just meet one time and you're instantly best friends? That's Joel and I, right? So Joel and I have a lot of things in common. We spent a lot of time in China manufacturing things. We have a lot of similar mutual friends through different industries, and Joel and I just hit it off, and Joel and I had created a relationship that ultimately led here, right? And it led by me giving Joel advice on how to help with potentially some of the projects in Softeq or some of the opportunities that had come up. And over those years, we got to where there was a dialogue about how to work together. So that's how it happened. It wasn't an overnight thing, right? And it wasn't transactional either, right? So that's how it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say about 10 years ago, my focus kind of went from maybe 8 to 10 years ago. My focus really went from working for startups to more being almost representing like an investor a lot of the times, right? And the reason I reached out to Joel originally about finding someone like Softeq is I was going to a lot of these companies, and mainly on the sales and the go-to-market side, we were getting traction. So we maybe launched it into retail, or we got a contract with some enterprise client, whatever it was. And what would happen is we would go do that, and then the project would fail because the firmware wasn't good or the back end failed or something. So I went to Joel and I'm like, I was asking Joel just for advice. Like, hey, do you know someone that I could go to that could just look under the hood and say, hey, this is worth spending the next 18 months on, right? Because the challenge for me personally, financially, is a lot of my financial upside was in getting that product through the supply chain to the end user and get the thing sold, right? So a lot of times I would get it to the 1 yard line, and then it would all crumble. And it's like, well, I just spent 18 months of my life doing that, right? So that's how I got introduced to Softeq, through Joel, specifically to help those companies either fill in the gaps where they didn't have expertise. So maybe it was a hardware company and they weren't good at firmware, right? Or whatever it was, right? They could help fill in those gaps and really give me a sense of security that there was a way to get it over the finish line, right? Because I think one thing I've learned is most companies are like ducks on a pond, right? It looks all calm on the top when you're being pitched what's going on, but when you get in underneath the water and you see what's going on in the company, everything's moving around 1,000 miles an hour. And I don't care if that's true of a startup that's just starting, or if you have, a corporation doing $1 billion a year in revenue. A lot of it's just scrambling and making it work, right? But I wanted that sense of assurance because it had gotten to the point where my name was on the line to make sure those things worked. And the funny part is, if we fast forward to today, there's a handful of those startups. They're still clients of Softeq. Softeq's still doing work for them. And some of them are literally changing the world, right? So one of them is a refrigerator company that we created the world's first vaccine fridge that we sold to UNICEF, and have saved millions and millions of people's lives. And the challenge to Softeq is how do you take that technology and make that work in Africa and in Southeast Asia and make it someone's first refrigerator, which sounds really simple, but all this is done on a pay-go system. So people pay and you got to turn it on and off if they do or don't pay it, kind of like a cell phone, but it's a refrigerator. So how do you do that, right?
All right.
So it's interesting to watch how that's happened over the years with how Softeq's engaged, I think, then re-engaged with these clients because they've built that sense of security between the companies, right? So it's fun now to be on the Softeq side and look and say, oh, they're still doing work, right?
Right.
Which means they're still growing, right? Which is the fun part. So that's how it happened. It was a long, convoluted roller coaster of ups and downs to get to where we are. And Joel played a role in that. So that's how we met.
So why is Houston ripe for innovation? I mean, you said you stayed for family. You also thought that Houston was something that was going to, or was ready to take off, right?
Yeah, I think at the core of it, it goes back to wanting to be an entrepreneur, right? I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs in the world, but I think entrepreneurship is one of those things that it's not a taught skill. You either are or you aren't. There's not a lot of middle of the road, right? I think Houston was one of those cities that was built by entrepreneurs, right? And I think that's
true. A couple of guys went out there and put the stake in the sand.
Yeah.
And called it Houston.
For sure, right? And I think that if you look at, industries that have really changed the world, right? I mean, I think, look, I'm all about, making the climate better and all those things. And I don't really care if you do or don't believe in climate change. Doesn't matter to me, right? I think what's interesting is the energy industry has fundamentally changed the world, right? And has dragged hundreds of millions, if not billions of people out of poverty and created a better world for it, by the way, right? I think if you look back at history, it's pretty incredible what was done in a short amount of time. And the same thing with the medical industry, right? Which Houston happens to be, the capital for both of those things, which is surprising, right? You have the energy capital of the world and you also have the largest medical center in the world, right? So I think just the foundation that those two things are and how those are so entrepreneurially driven is what creates that entrepreneurial mindset. I think the challenge that Houston has is not focused, right? And it's kind of it's like, if you want to get into the politics term, it's a flyover state, right? Now, I think that's changed a lot, right? I think COVID accelerated a lot of things in the world. I think one of the things that accelerated is this facade that you have to live on the coast to be successful. That's not true, right? Texas in general has some of the highest concentration of wealth in the world, right? And that wasn't pre-COVID, right? People have been here a long time making money. It just wasn't directed into what we consider startups, right?
Well, I think Houston, one thing Houston's been good at is reinventing itself. And that's a skill that a startup needs, right? You need to innovate or die. And Houston has been doing that actually over and over again. First as a shipping hub, which is still quite a big part of Houston, but then becoming the oil and gas capital of the world, now wanting to be the energy capital of the world, but then also having the medical center, having the space industry here. And so continuing to redefine and innovate in Houston as a whole, I think is really an analogy to what a startup has to do.
For sure.
And I think it's doing it yet again, both with being passed over by Amazon as one of the headquarters, and using that to spur a lot of different parts of the ecosystem along, from the government piece and the mayor being more interested in solving that problem and coming together. You got the investor community, you've got the startups, you've got a lot of people now finally coming together and saying, hey, how do we make this work? And that wasn't there several years ago, which we saw the gap going way back. But then also now it took us about 5 years to get this idea going. Actually, at Softeq, we're working together to put the venture fund and venture studio to support the startup ecosystem, so that people will actually take that plunge, create a startup, and then also stay here and fund the next level of startup, right? Because if they just start here and then leave, then you're not gonna get that cycle, right?
Yeah, I think like most things, people want the fun part of life, right? And I think that's true of the startup community, right? I mean, I think if there's a reason why Sand Hill Road exists and Palo Alto exists, right? It doesn't exist because that's where a bunch of financial people decided to go to build venture capital firms. No, that's where the tech industry started, the modern tech industry started, right? So it was a spin out of all the wealth created there. And I think the challenge that Houston's kind of tried to do it backwards. They wanted to create this venture fund environment without creating an entrepreneur model where startups are founded here, tech startups are founded here, and tech startups stay here, right? I think there are a lot of great tech startups that have been founded in Houston. I think the challenge Houston has is keeping them, right? And I always challenge a lot of the organizations we work with, which is, look, it's our job to get them here. It's not our job to keep them here. It's the city of Houston's job to keep them, right? And that includes, the nonprofit organizations, the other startup development organizations that focus on that. And at the end of the day, you got to create a system where people stay, right? And then once they stay and they exit, they become successful, and people invest in what they know, right? That's the reason why you can come here and you can get med tech money, or you can get money for your oil and gas startup, because that's what people know. Now, look, I do think we are at financially in Houston at a very unique point, which is you have a changing of the guard, right? And that's another thing COVID, I think, accelerated. You had a lot of people later on in life that were principals of family offices and had, high hundred millionaires and billionaires that they've now they are in the middle or have already transferred that wealth to the kids who are the new principals of these funds. They see the world differently for sure, right? Because a lot of them have grown up with more technology and they understand it. But I think that is one of the things that Houston has to focus on in the coming years is it has all the pieces of the puzzle. It's just it's going to take people like us and some other people in the community to really put the puzzle together, right? All the pieces are here. I think there's a lot of ecosystems where none of the pieces are there or one piece is there, right? In the US and in the world. Houston's unique because it has all the pieces.
Yeah,
right?
and those pieces for an ecosystem. I mean, it's talent,
Yep.
right? So we have talent. It's education.
Yep.
So we have strong educational system here. It's funding. There's a lot of money here. Just like you said, they were much more interested in throwing money in a hole in the ground than they were investing in tech, because tech can be hard to understand, right? And whether it's investable or not. There's the mentorship piece. So we need guys like you and Joel, myself, et cetera, to mentor this next level of startups, right? Location and events. So you need to have those events. You know, we had Joey on here, Cup of Joey and the Ion, all these things that need to be there so that we can pull the community together. And then the last thing is this incubation and acceleration, right? And what do you think is different about, say, our venture studio than some of the other accelerators that you've been to?
Yeah, I think it all goes back to de-risking the tech stack. And I think that there's just, it's funny, Chris and I yesterday were meeting with a local VC in Houston, and we were talking about traditionally hardware companies have been viewed by the venture world as extremely risky, right? And it's funny
compared to software.
Yeah. So what's funny is yesterday I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn, I forget who it was from, but about how they see software now just as risky as hardware, which is one of those things where, like, if you rewind 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago, it would have been comical to ever say that. Right. Now it's like, wait a minute, software is really just as hard. Right. And it's funny because this VC basically said that, like, we would almost rather invest in our hardware startup. And it's like, that's 10 years ago, that's something, or even 5 years ago, you'd have never heard that. Right. And I do think that's the part that makes us unique, is the ability to put a advisory CTO like we have in the studio with Dave Matthews that's built companies and scaled companies on both sides of it. I think one thing a lot of entrepreneurs don't credit are the ones where you lost or the ones you failed in. I would rather see a founder fail a few times because you learn so much more in the failures than you do in the successes, right? So we're not all about successes. We've all had our failures, and that's okay, right? But what makes it unique, I think, is the tech de-risking side. And we saw that when we went out to raise the fund, a lot of the LPs that we were talking to wanted to have an ability to look at a deal and they might even invest in it personally, right? Or through their family office or whatever. But they have it's so foreign to what they do, right? That they kind of wanted a stamp of approval from Softeq saying, hey, the tech is real, the tech isn't real, or these are the risks. This is where they're going to succeed. This is where they might fail. They kind of wanted that report card, right? And that's kind of what we do in the program from a tech standpoint. Not all the startups know that, but it's really like a giant diligence machine. Of course, we help them, right? We help them get connections, and we help them get them customers, and help them get in front of VCs and get better at pitching and all that. But it's really a diligence machine for us and for our LPs, because a little more than half of our fund is reserved specifically to do follow-on investing,
right?
And write those term sheets and help them with that difficult part of it.
So bring him into the studio, give him a little bit of funding, work with the founders for 90 days, get to know them really well, and then also get to know their tech and help them build that tech, right? So we help them build their MVPs, we help them build their POCs, or maybe we need to get their application enterprise ready. And then once they're through the studio, we can give a better idea to other investors whether that tech is actually real or not. I don't know how they would do it without someone that's technical, right? Because how do you know? You look at something, it looks like magic, right?
Well, I think that's the problem. If you want to go to the extremes, that's the Juiceros and the Theranoses of the world, right?
Right.
That's how it happens. It happens because...
And none of those investors were technical.
Correct. And they don't even... There is a lot of like similarities in the venture world to Ponzi schemes where you get these companies that really accelerate growth fast, and Jimmy gives money and then Susie puts money in and Jimmy exits, and there's a whole like layering thing that happens, right? But I do believe that there's there a lot of it is there are a lot of examples of companies that have gone to even become unicorns and raise hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, that were just totally fake, right? And they did that by no one raising their hand in the air and saying, hey, is that really real? Right? So I think like anything, there's motives on both sides. And that's part of what we teach the startups that go through is, this is how investing really works, right? We open up our family offices and our LPs and say, hey, if you were going to make a decision, what's your process, right? I think I would have been way more successful if 20 years ago I would have understood how a family office does diligence, right? I mean, I didn't know. I was just guessing, right? So I think we try to give them real world experience. We try to de-risk the tech. And then at the end of it, we try to help all of them succeed. Some of them, of course, we take a liking to and we'll invest or do a lead or even follow on in. And others, we're still going to help them try to get investing. It might just not, we might not be the right person, right?
I think that also with the program, it has attracted a different founder type, right? Because of the way we structured it, partly because of COVID, where a lot of people think about the successful founders being the 18-year-old Zuckerbergs of the world, right? But statistically, the age of the average founder is something like 40, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the founders that are coming through the studio actually are, in that demographic. Maybe talk a little bit about how that happened.
Yeah, that's a surprise, right? I didn't expect it. I think some of the things in life you have to just be willing to admit that like they weren't programmed, that it didn't happen.
Yeah.
That just happened.
You need
right?
some luck anyway.
And I think part of that was, when we were originally outlining the program, it was the later days of COVID in Texas, still the early days in California, right? But in Texas, in Florida, it was the later days.
Yeah.
And it was funny, even we were interviewing people during that process, some of them were from places that were a little more locked down and they were like, very worried, right? And there was really, I'm not going to say who it was, but there was one specific company, I think, that really changed our outlook on that, and they were willing to come, but only for a week. And we're like, okay, that makes sense. So we'll do this programming a week, and a week.
1 week per month.
1 week per month for 3 months.
In person,
right? And it kind of made sense to me as I think through my journey of going through these things. And there's a lot of time just sitting in chairs, right? And there was a lot of wasted time where it's like, hold on, if I would have condensed that into like a week of nonstop, I could have probably accomplished the same thing and then gone back and worked on the things I wanted to work on. And that's one of those accidental things that happened.
So they're a little older founder, maybe coming from an environment where they've left a job, they've been running multi-million-dollar divisions of some company, and they've taken the red pill going to create a startup.
Yep.
And but they don't want to be gone for 90 days from their family, right?
Yeah, I mean most
or even a job. They might be working two
correct,
jobs, right?
Right. Most people aren't. Most spouses, or if you have kids, aren't like my kids and my spouse, Christina, that will pick up and move around the world for you, right? That's not common, right? They don't want their life flipped upside down, right?
Right.
So look, being away from your family a week, a month is easy. Saying you're going to go away for 90 days is hard, right?
And then the dynamic of startups, I think, has changed too. I mean, a different generation has come along where they have ideas, but they're not necessarily inherently technical. So I think you shared a statistic before where 9 out of 10 startups had a technical co-founder, and now it's really 9 out of 10 don't.
Yeah.
Right?
So, I mean, I think that's like pretty well accepted that there's a lot of non-technical founders starting technical companies. And that could be because of, I think about back to the first startup we did in the e-commerce space, just how difficult. Like, I think if I told younger people now, or I'm not trying to sound like I'm old, or people starting an e-commerce business now, how difficult credit card processing was, it would blow their mind.
No,
right?
When I started, it still was during the days of the, carbon paper copy, key it into some keypad terminal, which apparently was innovative at the time where you could get the approvals, but you had to key in the freaking credit card number and the expiration, all online, right? And you had to have that carbon copy receipt.
Yep.
Right?
I mean, we had to balance load we had to have different terminals that took there were like...
and online credit card stuff was
a whole different animal 20 years ago. That's all we did was online. We were selling $1,000 widgets online, right? And I don't even know what our average order size was. It was a couple $1,000 probably, right? Which was unheard of. So we had to create software that would balance load authorized .NET accounts and keep them from crashing. And the whole thing was a nightmare, right? And it's like now you just I could open up a Shopify and a store right now while we're sitting here having this conversation and be selling stuff, right? But that doesn't mean that the other parts of the business aren't technical. Because once you go out of that bubble that's been created to make it easy, I think it's infinitely more difficult, right? Because now you're dealing with complex software that's been made to be user-friendly, right, to the average person that's not technical. And it's inherently more difficult when you look at scaling the company. And some of those founders might be technical on a certain thing, but they're not technical in the 10 skills that you need.
So how does the Venture Studio solve that problem?
Yeah, so I think the core of it starts with this dual approach of we have a CTO that's an advisor, and they really what a CTO really should be. I think the term, I get in arguments with some of our technical people about this, but a CTO most CTOs I know don't sit around and code all day, right? They're looking at long-term strategy for the technical stack of the organization, right? That's what they do. They know how to do it, but that's not their job, right? And I think a lot of startups get hung up on that. The CTO is doing all this work, right? So we pair each company with a very technical CTO advisor, the main one being a guy named Dave Matthews. And then from that, we bolt on a division for most startups of Softeq that is the seed team. So this is a team that is the solutions engineering team. They're very good at quickly establishing the need and putting together a program for the short term. So how do you add that feature in 90 days or solve that bug or get it enterprise ready or whatever it is in a short period of time? Because I think one thing founders really don't understand is like investors are looking for small incremental wins over time. They don't want to see what you did over 12 months. They want to see in 3 months, we went from here to here. We got an LOI. We got a new customer. We increased our revenue. Or it could be we added that feature, right? So we look initially in the studio of what impact can we make in this short period of time? And that typically wows the investors, right? And it can be anything from an idea. I remember a startup we had in the first batch had this crazy idea around automating landscape design, right? They basically had an idea. They didn't even know how to do it, right? And I remember that in that first 3 or 4 months, we got them to the point where they had a really rough demo. I don't know if that company would be around today if they wouldn't have had that really rough demo. Now, look, it worked on one house with one address on Google Maps or whatever, right?
Right.
But it proved, I think, to everyone that it could be done at scale. And look, now fast forward a year later, they're getting ready to launch it on one of the largest e-commerce platforms for selling trees or plants or whatever in the world, right? Or in America. So I think that's what we try to teach them is that you don't need to boil the ocean and fix everything overnight. You just need to show that you can incrementally win. And I think that's something that Dave really hits on really well, right? When the companies come in. And then I think bolting on the tech talent is something that can't be like thrown lightly, right? It is really hard to find. It's really hard to find and hire talent across any spectrum. I think some of the hardest talent to find is technical talent. And then more importantly, it's getting them to get along and work together, right? It's really difficult. Because I think and I'm not technical, but I've had to manage technical people most of my career, right? And I've always struggled with the egos and how they think there's their way to do it's the right way to do it, right? And I never understood why most VCs like wanted startups to go spend most of their burn on hiring all this talent and then hoping the team worked. Didn't make any sense. Like, why wouldn't you go to someone like a Softeq or any provider that's good and just get the talent that you need when you need it, right?
Not cobble together a team that has never shipped a product before, and even though they might be talented, but also you're having to compete with the big guys like the Facebooks and Googles of the world and pay them high salaries so they don't go and work at some other enterprise job, right?
Yeah. So I think that's the technical part that look, maybe there's someone else doing it. I hope there is because it's adding value to our community, and I'm sure that's adding value to whatever community they're in. But it's really hard to build, right? Like building the mentoring and that part of it, the programmatic part of the studio is fairly trivial and simple, right?
There's a lot of these accelerators, they cover the normal stuff of pitching and marketing, et cetera, like you said, but they don't have the ability to help someone actually get something built.
No, they don't, right? And And I don't think that was ever their intent, right? But it's needed today more than ever because most things that are being done today are significantly more technically complicated, I think, right? And I think that meeting we had yesterday with the local VC in Houston was the same thing. I mean, these are two partners saying this of a firm that's deployed, $100 million in the last 18 months into this space, right? And they're saying the same thing, right? So I think we're just going to see more and more of a need for like what we're building, right?
I think both of us are fascinated by how collisions actually happen in very random places, maybe even non-obvious, but then also adopting that give first mentality. So I believe some of our best relationships have happened in non-obvious places.
Yeah, that's been my whole life. But specific to this, I don't think any of this would have happened in the form it's happening and the speed that it's happening at today if it wouldn't have been for when we moved here 6 or 7 years ago, whatever it was. I think it's actually more like 7, but whatever, it doesn't matter. Time is like it's a thing that moves around a lot in my mind. But when we moved here, we were working on that side of town. We actually wanted to move to the Woodlands because we're boating people, right? And I think had we not come and looked at places to live and gone and stayed at City Center, we rented an Airbnb at City Center. And I think if we wouldn't have done that, we probably would have never moved to this part of Houston. We probably would have gone to the Woodlands and lived on one of the lakes or whatever, right? But we were Airbnb and it was 2 miles from the office. So I'm like, let's just move here. So why we decide where we want to live in the city, right? So we lived at City Center in an apartment for the first couple of years. And that set up we decided we wanted to put our kids in preschool. So they went to this little preschool around the corner called Pines. And that's where we met some of our best friends in Houston, which is Rula and Tasso. And Tasso was previously at Accenture and was a management consultant that did his consulting thing. And he kind of got passionate about baking bread, which he's a Greek guy and he loves to cook. And that's where we spend most of our Sundays is at their house when he's cooking for us. And he's great at cooking, right? And he randomly got into the bread business, right? And it's one of those things that went from like a passion to a business. And as it started to become a business, at this point, we were really good family friends, right? We're over there on Thanksgiving and they're kind of they still are our family away from our family. So, as Tasso started to build that business, he needed help, right? And the first need for help was he had people that wanted to give him money and he had never had investors or understood how he didn't know what a cap table was. Hindsight, if we'd had the studio, he probably would have gone through the studio if it wasn't technical, right? Because he could have used from all the education around the business side, right? So I helped Tasso raise his first round to really move from Tasso moved from his kitchen.
Just because, by the way, right?
I don't have nothing. I have no skin in the game. Yeah. I always joke with him about where's my equity at, but I don't actually have equity in that company, right? It was all just to help him, right? And it's because I knew that one day it would hopefully come back to me in some way. If not, I'd always have something to hang over his head to get free bread. So if I'm ever on the street, my kids will always have bread to eat, right? Yeah, right. So, we helped him raise his first round and he moved very quickly from his house to a little like co-op. I actually never went there, but it's a couple hundred square feet to like a 3,000 or 2,000 square foot bakery, right? Almost overnight, right? So I helped him raise his first round and fast forward, we decided to beta test the studio model, right? And I went to Tasso and said, hey, like, I just need a connection to some people that could come in and listen to these companies and I don't need anything from these people. All I want is I want them to come and listen to these terrible companies pitch and give them critical feedback. Because if they hear it from me for 3 months, they're not going to listen. Right. So he introduced me to what happened to be, Tasso didn't know him, but it happened to be his son, Matthew Jimmy's soccer coach, right? Who ultimately is the managing partner of what became our founding LP that gave us a substantial amount of our fund, right? Now that would have never happened if I hadn't poured into that relationship with Tasso for years and helped him with the bakery and helped him raise the money and do all that. I don't think I would have had a relationship on that level to go to Tasso with a business need, right? Because it wasn't even though that was a transactional ask, it still wasn't a transactional relationship, right? Our relationship stretched from being personal into business, and then back, and it's constantly doing that, right? So I think you just got to pour into people, right? Soccer's been good to me. So
I should have had my kids play soccer. They played baseball. I wasn't finding any LPs on the baseball field, but you've had a pretty good success.
I've had a pretty good
soccer.
success. Look, I think you just got to not be a jerk. Be nice to people and help them, right? And eventually it'll come back, right?
It's a culture.
It's
culture
just,
fit.
you get that person in there and it's just not the right thing, right? So I'm sure they'll go on to do a lot of great things and be successful. And I don't wish any of those companies any ill or anything bad. I think you got to be, I think that's why we've attracted the type of talent we have and really the age of the entrepreneur, right? I mean, granted, we are older too, right? We're not 22-year-old kids from UCLA either. So, I mean, part of that's just who we are.
Speak for yourself. Yeah.
But that's how that all happened. I mean, it wasn't because...
It's not a zero-sum game. I think some people think it is. That's where we're trying to do the same thing, whether it's SDOs or it's personal relationships. I mean, everyone can succeed. The tide raises all boats. And if you sincerely give first without the requirement to get back, I mean, in many times it does come back eventually. It might be years and years. It may be never, right? That's why you need to be sincere about it. But it's an investment in people.
Yeah, and I think it's seizing opportunities, right? Like, look, was it comfortable? Like the first, I don't know, I'm making it up, but the first 10 times or 6 times I was at our friend's house, it wasn't comfortable. Like, I'm the dad, I don't really know them. I mean, of course, Christina's really good friends with the kid's mom, and the kids are all getting along, and like, sometimes you got to get uncomfortable, right? And that's one thing I think. I try to do in the studio as a leader is to get people uncomfortable, right? And I force environments to happen where that happens. Some of them
talk to people you don't know.
Yeah, and some of them late at night, and some of them early in the morning, super early in the morning. But like, you have to get uncomfortable. And I've seen so many, even in our studio, I get after people, right? I'm not supposed to be the nice guy if you're in our portfolio, right? I let other people be the nice guy. I'm the mean guy. But we've sponsored things where there were some of the wealthiest people in Houston and they don't go, right?
You mean the startups?
The startups.
Yeah, I think some people either they don't know how to network, or they're uncomfortable networking, or they don't understand, like, for example, in particular, like the Rice Business Plan competition. Well, first of all, you should go to that and just watch how these startups that are in the finals from all over the country and even the world are pitching, right? If you're a startup founder and you're trying to figure out how to pitch and you're trying to figure out how to raise capital, that's a pretty good event to go to. But second, if you're thinking, well, I don't want to spend my day just sitting in the seat, it's really, sometimes the event is more about what can you do in the in-between times, right?
Yeah.
What can you do in the lobby? What can you do after every, break, where you stand up and all these people have to be in the room. And if you're looking around, you'll notice that, there are all the guys that I've been trying to chase and get on a call or get on a meeting for weeks or months, and they're there, right? And you need to go up and talk to them, right?
For sure. I mean, look, I think I've built my business relationships on actually having a relationship with the person first. And whether you're raising money, I think a lot of entrepreneurs put way too much of a focus on raising money. Money is just a tool, right? There's plenty of money in the world, but there's a Zig Ziglar speech, if you guys know, he's a motivational guy from back in the day, but he has a saying
You're
about—
You're dating yourself.
I know I am. But he has this, I'm getting my MLM stuff out, right? But he has a saying about money is like, it's rated right up there with oxygen. Because it's true. Because when you need it, it's the only thing you need, right?
I always think of it like blood, but yeah, same thing.
Yeah, but it isn't the most important thing in the world, and it literally is just a tool. And right now there's literally an infinite supply, which is why inflation's so high. But right now, I mean, like, there's a lot of people sitting on a lot of capital, right? People just need a good enough of a reason to let go of it, right? And I think a lot of startups focus way too much on raising money because it's hard and they need it in that moment in time, but they don't understand the real hard thing is actually finding product market fit and selling your product to consumers or enterprise clients or whoever you're selling it to, that's the hard part. And they don't realize that you're going to have to get uncomfortable, right? No matter who you are. I remember I was at a startup that was in the toy furniture world and the kids world, right? That was my ingenious idea after I had kind of gone back on my own, and my kids, I had just had Savannah, my daughter, who's 11 now, and they're like, oh, hey, you should, I'm like, my wife's like, you got to get a real job. I'm like, okay, I'll get a real job. So I went and worked for a kids toy and furniture company, and we went on to do like a lot of really cool stuff, but one of them was selling to Target, right? And these two founders of this company were like afraid to pick up the phone.
Really?
Right? And they're like, oh, I went in as like the whatever, I don't remember what my title was, national sales manager or something, whatever it was, right? And I'm like, sure, we can go sell at Target. How hard could it be? I picked up the phone, called a friend of mine who was selling stuff to Walmart, and they're like, oh, you need to call this person at Target. So I picked up the phone and just called the person, right? It was a lady. I'm not going to give the name away because I don't want her people blowing up her situation. I don't know if she's still there. But, I just picked up the phone. She happened to be the VP of that category, right? And a week later, we had a meeting. It happened to be, and I think this is a thing that all entrepreneurs don't get, is that it's about that the timing has to be right. The timing for Target was weirdly right. They had a product that had to be taken off the shelves because of an IP issue, and they had 4 linear feet open of storage products. Just happened to be, we sold toy storage. So we went in with a poster that we had printed off at Kinko's in the middle of the night, right? That was 4 feet by 6 or 7 feet, whatever a inline display is, right? And we walk in and we hang it. And we didn't have anything. It was all fake, right? We ended up selling them 4 linear feet in one section, 8 linear feet total, right? Changed the outcome of that company. But people are afraid to just pick up the phone, right? And have and leverage a relationship. But in order to get that conversation started at Target, I had to have that relationship with the person that knew them, right? I'd have never had that if I didn't have a relationship with the other person, right? I think a lot of people miscalculate how long it takes to build that. Right?
The network.
Yeah, I think we've even seen it in the core business in Softeq. Now that we're on the boots on the ground in Houston, like we're getting people to talk to us about the core business that we never had relationships with, right? And that's not because it's transactional, right? It's because we're inviting them to the startup events. We're inviting them to go to an Astros game. We're inviting them to go. You just got to get out there and be uncomfortable. Look, I don't love doing all that, right? Personally, I would much rather go out on my boat alone and hang out with my family. But at some point, you gotta be willing to do it, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of founders actually are introverts,
for sure.
And people are surprised when I say I'm an introvert. Like when I get tested on those personality things, I'm an introvert. But I have to be uncomfortable and push myself out there and do the things that normally people would think of like an extrovert, right? I think sounds like you're similar. If you want to go out on a boat and you're fine doing that all day and you don't need to go seek out a bunch of people, that's what a lot of being an introvert is about.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that, just because you get up on stage doesn't automatically make you an extrovert, right?
No, I actually think it makes better entrepreneurs because you're able to sit in your own self and think for a while about how to solve that problem. And you're not worried about how you look or anything like that. I think there's a lot of fakers in the space, right? There's a lot of fake entrepreneurs. There's a lot of people that really want it for the wrong reasons. And I think that is the reason why a lot of introverts are successful entrepreneurs, right? I think it just goes along with that. I've failed every test I've ever taken in my life, right? So it's just my MO, right? But yeah, I think it's something you gotta be willing to get uncomfortable, right?
If you're at an event, don't stand there and talk to people you know. Talk to somebody you don't know.
And try to add value to someone else. Don't make it about you. That's the truth, right? Just like people don't care about our venture studio, they don't really care, right?
Right.
It's what can you do to help that person, right? And I think a lot of people misunderstand that, right? Like when you're talking to a big corporation like Exxon, right? Exxon doesn't care about what you're doing. How can you help that person make their life easier in whatever they're doing, And
My
that's
goal was always to try to get that person promoted. If I could.
for sure. Right.
Yeah.
And then just meet people where they're at, right? Like I think a lot of, I mean, we even have it in the fund, right? Now that I'm on the other side, and I think you are too on the investing side, it's like sometimes you have to wonder. I see now on the other side why some people just fail, right? Because I think reading the room is another big one, right? So like, I think a lot of the forced conversations with investors happen because it's not forced by the investor, it's forced by the other side, right? Generally speaking, I tell, like, we're all busy, so yes, you should follow up with us. But generally speaking, if you follow up 2 or 3 or 4 times and we don't respond, there's probably a reason why. Eventually we will respond, right? And the answer will probably be to give you a phone call. But the purpose of it is just that I feel bad. I can't say I feel bad, so I do it, right? But I think learning that skill set of like reading the room too, about like, that's a thing that people have a huge problem with at networking. They talk to the wrong person for too long, right? I get in trouble from this from my wife all the time, like not saying hi to people or like being a little rude, right? And maybe that's the introvert in me. I can tell her now. But, I think some of it's just like, moving on when you're in those networking sessions and not spending 20 minutes with each person. Go talk to someone for 2 or 3 minutes and move to the next conversation, right? So it's a skill. You got to learn it, right? It's not something that you're going to get day one. But
So how does the work that we're doing with startups forging the future?
Yeah, so look, I think we're making a lot of gambles on people that would have been looked over, right? I think that's what we've done, right? We have an extremely diverse group of people. We have a ton of female founders, right?
It's very diverse,
It's very diverse. And I think that's a function of quite honestly, probably like us living in Houston. Like you have to be open to diversity because it's everywhere you go, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't get in in the perfect world, what would happen is you don't get in the way of the diversity.
Correct.
And it actually happens like it should. If you're in a diverse culture and a network, then that's what the cohort should look like.
Correct.
Because you're not like saying, "Oh, you don't look like me, so I don't understand you, and I'm not going to let you into the cohort."
Yeah.
Right?
We don't really do that, right? We just look at people for their idea and people for who they are, right? And I think that's kind of bred like a pretty interesting, diverse group of people that some of them are serial entrepreneurs. Some of them have spent almost 30 years of their life in corporate America,
right?
Going around the world, right? And I think what ultimately is going to make the portfolio successful and the fund successful and all of us successful is that diversity. And really more importantly, the fact that you have people we have founders that have been at those corporations for 20, 30 years that have made the decisions that some of these startups that have never been there are having to sell into. So they're able to talk to that person that used to run that $500 million division or $200 million division, right? So I think we're betting on the ones that a lot of people wouldn't be betting on. Now, look, I think once they come through the program and we tweak a few of the things, like we had this one company one time, he's become a very good friend of mine, but for the first, I just really liked him, right? Like I didn't know what the hell he did. Full disclosure, I voted to let him in, which is probably bad to say to our LPs, but I didn't actually know what he did. I had no idea, right? I knew he was doing something, and it looked cool, but I didn't actually know what he did. So it was funny because like the startup. Yeah, I didn't actually know it. None of it made sense to me. Like, what the hell are you talking about? And then like 6 weeks in, I'm like, show me a demo, and then I figured it out. And we were able to craft his story differently to where it's like, okay, now they'll bet on you, right? And they are, and he's winning customers and he's getting investors, and that's great, right? But I think that's how we're forging the future, right? Is we're betting on the ones that most people wouldn't bet on, right? Not all of them, but a lot of them, right? And these founders, generally speaking, are extremely knowledgeable in their space. Right. Some of them are award-winning architects in the outdoor space, right? That they don't know how to do the technology, but they know how to make the world's most beautiful garden, or they understand the complexities of working within some of the largest enterprise companies in the world, right? And how they talk to each other, and the challenges with getting Salesforce to talk to SAP, or it could be a medical doctor that sees a challenge with whatever. Most people aren't going to bet on them, right? And we are. And I think the result is a diverse group of people that really are doing some things that could change the world, right? In one way or another.
So where can someone find or connect with you?
Yeah. So don't email me. No, I'm just joking. Go to softeq.com and you'll see on the top there's a Venture Studio banner. You can click on that and apply. Everyone needs to apply. I don't care who you are, who you know, you still need to apply. It's how it gets in the system. So you should apply. It's super simple.
Everyone gets a call back.
Everyone gets a call or an email back from someone, right? We're pretty hands-on. So the team will run through them. You'll get an intro call. And then from there, if you work your way through the process, you'll talk to 4 or 5 different people, and then the decisions are made. We run the cohorts twice a year. So it'll be in the next cohort where we're accepting applications will be for early 2023. It's hard to believe
We've already done 50 now.
Yep, we got 50 in the hopper. 50 done. Right? They're not even in the hopper, they're done. Which is crazy. We did that in a year, right? You think about like how many deals we've looked at. I don't even know the number, but it's a lot.
Hundreds, yeah. So how can someone find out the latest about resources and programming at the Venture Studio?
So you follow us on social media, mainly on LinkedIn,
all right,
at Softeq Venture Studio, and all the other platforms. We have a great social media person on staff that makes sure that all that information gets out there. That's the best place to find it.
We have a lot of public events. We've got, I don't know when this will air. We've got one next week, happy hour. So a lot of fun. People come down. So Billy, one of the fun things I like to do is, of course, wear different kinds of interesting socks. Normally they're tech. Today I wore baseball socks because I know your love of the Astros and your love of betting on the Astros.
We're winning the World Series.
We're winning the World Series this year again. So yeah. So I got you some socks, the coolest guy on the conference room socks. And I see you're not wearing socks today, so you definitely need a pair.
Yes. I got the low rise socks, but I will wear these.
All right.
I will wear these socks on one of our 700,000 conference calls that we have every week.
That is perfect. True. Well, you're definitely the coolest guy in the conference room call. So anyway, thanks for coming today, Billy. It's been a pleasure. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.